On today's episode of Teammate Talks, I really wanted to get into what I feel like is a very important discussion about the importance of challenges, especially for kids, right? I feel like these new generations coming up, I feel like the ideas of how to focus and how to handle challenges, especially challenges through social interactions, are more important than ever, right? Now, there's this big rise, especially in these new generations, of things like, I'm going to call it the age of social media. And when I say social media, I'm including things like online gaming and things along those lines. Those things are really, really big, and they're going to be a part of the future. They're just going to be a part of the future. There's some good things that can come out of that, and I think it's important that both adults now and kids learn how to use that responsibly and how to, both enjoy and leverage those things as tools in their life. So I'm not trying to talk bad about those in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, most of the only challenges those bring in are like mental challenges that are faced with a controller, right? In a room by yourself with some people on a microphone and things along those lines. Those things also, though, make it harder to pay attention to real life. I've done some videos before and some Teammate Talks episodes before called, I believe they were titled The Hard Talks. So we talked about addiction and how even things like gaming and social media can lead to addictive behaviors and the withdrawal symptoms and things from that and how terrible that can be. So I do feel like, though, that those things are going to be important for the next generation. They're going to be important to know how to use. They're going to be important to know how to leverage. But at the same time, it makes it harder to pay attention to real life. And the less we pay attention to real life, the more difficult it becomes to do things in real life, to create things, to do things physically, and it becomes more difficult to deal with physical consequences, and it becomes more difficult to deal with social interactions, and that can be a problem, right? You're trying to build a life, you're trying to make friends, you're trying to build a family, and these things that most people would want for their kids as they go through life are going to become more and more difficult if those kids have a difficult time paying attention to real life, or a difficult time dealing with physical consequences, or a difficult time learning how to cope with the real world, right? A big part of health is not just the mental challenges, which you can get those from video games and things like that, but it's also physical challenges and being able to bridge the gap to do both at the same time. And I feel like that's what we do here at Peaceful Warriors, right? Whether we're doing the martial arts, we're doing the parkour tricking, we're doing capoeira, that's what it's really all about. It's overcoming mental challenges while at the same time bringing the physical aspect in it and overcoming physical challenge. So I want to know your thoughts on how important you think challenges and learning about how to focus are going to be for future generations. So one of the reasons I bring this up is without challenge, if someone's not challenged, there can be no discipline. Without challenge and learning to cope with and overcome challenges, what are we going to carve who we are on, right? How do we discover what we really are, or what we can really be, or what our potential is if we're not faced with challenges? And I know this last year with COVID and everything's made things so much worse, right? It's kind of escalated and fast forwarded this situation with the lack of social interactions the kids have been able to have, and then coming back to it without that social interaction, that regular learning of coping, then we have that issue of when they come back together not knowing how to interact with each other, which can cause a lot of anxiety, cause a lot of depression. A lot of juvenile and anxiety depression numbers are really high right now, mostly because of that, not knowing how to deal with things, right? And I feel like physical and social challenges, physical challenges, mental challenges, and social interactions are really important for a person's development. They're really important for the development of the brain, and they're really important to help a person, can't get my words out this morning, really important to help a person develop their character as well and learn their potential, who they really are, and what they can really be. But one of the things that we run into quite a bit these days, and this is something that scares me for future generations, is occasionally we run into somebody who is up in their teenage years, like up in the 12 to 17-year-old range, that when put in a social situation or when physically challenged, right, to do something physical they've never done before, or when challenged to try to learn something new, we run into this a lot. Oftentimes there's these kids that get so anxious about it, so worked up about it, and don't know how to deal with the challenge. They don't know how to overcome a challenge. And so the second they're faced with a challenge or they go to try something new and they see that there's someone else over here next to them that maybe is doing it better or maybe having an easier time, they'll just quit, right? They'll just give up. It's like, oh, can't do it. Well, because they're standing next to someone who's been doing it for 10 years, and then suddenly because they can't do it at the level of that person that's been doing it for 10 years, suddenly that just means to them they can't do it at all and they give up. This is something that we run into quite a bit, but a lot of times these people in this situation, they don't know how to cope with it. So they'll get really anxious and they'll start acting like a 4-year-old that hasn't learned social interaction yet. So instead of using their words and talking about the trouble they're having or talking about what it is that they're having a hard time with, a lot of times they'll just stop and kind of throw a tantrum, get down on their knees and crawl off into a corner, or act in a what I would consider a really strange way for their age. But if you think about it, it really is the way a 4-year-old might act when put into an anxiety-inducing situation or a brand new challenge around a bunch of people, and they start feeling embarrassed or ashamed. They'll try to hide themselves. They won't want to listen, and there's where you end up with a lot of behavior issues. So one of the things that I've seen, and it really scares me, is I've seen a rise lately in behavior issues in older and older and older teenagers and kids that seem to be caused by this same thing. They seem to be caused by this lack of ever having to do something even when they didn't want to. This lack of ever having to learn discipline or the ability to try your best, even if it's something that maybe you don't want to do, or maybe it's scary, or maybe it's difficult, to be able to continue to try your best and not worry about how well you do at it. But I've been seeing this rise in kids that have spent the vast majority of their time on social media, on YouTube, on video games and stuff like that. And again, I'm not trying to talk bad about any of that. I do that kind of stuff too, and I play those kind of things, but there are addictive behaviors related to it, and if that begins to take the fully replace social interaction and physical challenges, then often what happens is, these kids that have never been put through challenges, that have never had to learn how to cope with challenges, that have just been allowed to kind of sit there and do their thing and have never had to have responsibilities and things along those lines, end up the first time they run into this in their life, and often it's happening at older and older ages, the first time they run into a situation where they just have to keep trying, or the first time they run into a situation where they just can't do it right off the bat but somebody next to them can, then they just shut down, right? They just shut down. But how is that going to translate into the workforce? You know what I mean? How is that going to translate into the workforce? How is that going to translate into entrepreneurial nature, right? If someone wants to be able to start their own business, and I get it. There's a lot of the kids that I've talked to that spend a lot of their time online that are like, well, I want to leverage that. I want to leverage the online thing into an entrepreneurial pursuit. And that's awesome, right? That's awesome. That's amazing. But you still have to be able to take on challenges. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be able to interact with other people socially. You have to be able to talk. You have to have leadership ability. You've got to have that creative aspect as well, right? But you've also got to have that discipline and perseverance. And the only way you learn discipline and perseverance is by being challenged and being forced to overcome challenges. So in my opinion, I think it's becoming more and more important than ever for parents, right? And I talk to some people about this quite a bit. I would say, if you think you want to be a parent, then the first thing you have to ask yourself is, are you ready to challenge your child? Or are you wanting to do the whole, I want to make the best life for my child, so therefore I'm going to give them everything they want, and I'm going to make sure we have everything in place, and they're going to be able to do whatever they want in their free time, and et cetera, et cetera. That all sounds great, right? Because I didn't get that as a kid, so I know when my son was first born, I thought that way at first. I was like, well, I want to give him everything. I want to give him everything he wants. I'll make his life so much better than mine, and this, that, and the other. But I realized very quickly, before he was even 2 or 3, that that's not the important thing to a kid's development. The important thing to a kid's development is challenges. Being able to be challenged and not have the option to quit, but to be forced to do something, right? Through social consequence, right? So to have social interactions. Okay, well, if you want to buy that thing, I'm going to have you buy it yourself, and you have to go up to the cashier if they ever wanted. We want them to be able to earn these things. We want them to have the skills, the discipline, and the perseverance to learn new things. We want them to be able to take on new challenges and to act respectably in those situations, right? I mean, I know I wouldn't, let's talk about Axel for a second. If he was 14 and I took him to somewhere he wanted to go learn something, whether it's something mental, like maybe coding, or if I took him somewhere to go learn leadership skills, or if I took him somewhere to go learn some new parkour tricks or something along those lines, no matter how much trouble he had, I would hope that he would have the tenacity and the discipline to stay with it, keep trying, not get frustrated, and try to have a good time while he's doing it. Well, the thing is those are learned skills. The ability to take on a challenge with that kind of mindset, that's a learned skill. That's not something people are just born with, right? So if that is the first time that he had been challenged his whole life, if that were the first time he'd ever been forced to learn something, next to someone who's been doing it longer, if that had been the first time that he had ever taken on something new and other people were there doing it better than he could on his first day, then he was likely going to quit. He was likely going to give up, because it's easy for people that get everything handed to them as children. It's easy to begin to think that, well, if it's meant for me to do, then I'll be good at it right off the bat. I'll be good at it the first time I try. But we all know that that's not the case, right? Even in video games, it's never the case. You can be all right at the beginning, right, when you first try, but it takes practice at it. It takes work at it to get better. And that's the same thing with physical challenges, and it's the same thing with mental challenges. But without all those challenges, then how do we learn to build who we are? How do we learn what our character is? How do we have that peer group that we bounce the idea of who we are off of, right? And this all comes down to the importance of social interaction and social consequence, because there is social consequence, and that can be terrifying. When you're working next to somebody, you're learning something next to somebody or something along those lines, you shouldn't worry about what other people think, but people, their first instinct tends to be comparing themselves to the person next to them and comparing themselves to other people. And if they don't know how to cope with that, if they don't know how to drop that, then they're going to have a difficult time, and they're probably going to want to give up after the first day. They're probably going to want to quit no matter what it is that they're doing, right? Because they've never been forced to deal with social interaction. They've been forced to deal with the discipline it takes to have that social interaction and learn how to not let how good someone else is at something deter you, to learn how to not let someone else's opinion of what you look like deter you. But instead, kids get into this position, especially with the lack of challenge and a lack of social interaction, they get into this position that if they feel like they're having trouble with something right off the bat, and that person over there is doing it really well, regardless of how long they've been doing it, then they suddenly think that person over there is judging them, and that person over there thinks they're terrible at this, so then they feel bad about themselves, and they lose their confidence, lose their self-esteem, and then behavior issues come out. This is where sometimes I have seen 15-year-old kids throw 4-year-old tantrums before in here, simply because, they saw a 10-year-old who had rose to the challenges, who had been doing this for some time, able to do something that they were struggling with in their first attempt trying it. And because that 10-year-old can do it and they can't, it must mean that 10-year-old thinks they're better than me. And if that 10-year-old thinks they're better than me, then that hurts my confidence. And now that my confidence is hurt, I don't want to do this anymore. Now that I don't want to do this anymore, I've never had to deal with social consequence of throwing a tantrum in public. I've never had to deal with those consequences, so I'm going to go ahead and throw the tantrum. And then you end up with that 15-year-old that's acting like a 4-year-old, right? And then I look at those kids and I wonder, I'm like, how is that kid ever going to make it at a job? How is that kid ever going to make it at other things that they do? You know what I mean? And I've seen this before, even without the tantrum thing, right? There's some kids that have a certain amount of discipline. One person I've dealt with comes to mind in this, had a certain amount of discipline, mostly because this was a person who found some things that they were naturally talented at and they were already kind of good at, and then worked at those things and got better at them. And that's a good way to go, right? Finding what you're naturally talented at and getting better at it. But then it got to this point where this person started to think they knew everything, right? Started to think there was nothing else they could learn from anybody. And so then every time they went to do anything, it became a showing off thing, right? It became a power grab. It became I'm going to prove to everyone around that I'm better than him. I'm going to prove to this person I'm better than him, because by hurting his feelings, by tearing him down and things along those lines. And then this person becomes a complete jerk, right? Then that person turns 18, right? And they're supposed to get out into the world, but they don't. They go ahead and find other people to live with, and they don't bother to get a job and things along those lines, while at the same time walking around talking about how I'm grown and I'm a full-grown adult and this, that, and the other. But man, if you're not out on your own, you're not paying your own bills, you ain't running your own job, you ain't doing the discipline, then you're not there yet. I don't care if you're 24 years old. You know what I mean? Then you don't know. Now, maybe that's just my opinion, because I was on my own at 16. Had to work my own work on my own, earn my own money, pay my own bills. I had to go to school. I had to figure all that stuff out on my own. So maybe I see things a little bit different. But I worry about the new generations coming up like that, right? I remember my generation was always called entitled by the older generations, and I didn't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I worked hard. But I look at some of the new stuff, fresh adults coming up, and man, some of them, it kind of scares me, right? Some of them don't have the discipline to be able to hold down a job. Some of them don't have the humility to be able to work for somebody else, or to be able to learn a skill so that they can improve their career and improve what they're doing, right? Instead, I see a lot of people who want to kind of hide back and play a safe thing, right? Like not do much or do very little so that they can claim that they're great at what they do. Okay, so you're great at this very simple task, but how are you going to improve on that? How are you going to build through your life? You know what I mean? Extra stuff like that. So this is where I feel like challenging kids is really important. So that's a couple different things that can come out of it. Sometimes you'll end up with that child that's never had to pull responsibility, that child that's never been forced to hold on to their responsibilities, to deal with the consequences, as in like, okay, your job is to do your own laundry. You don't do your own laundry, your clothes start to stink. Your clothes start to stink. People around you are going to start making fun of you because you don't smell good and things along those lines, right? That's a social consequence to a lack of discipline. And dealing with the social consequence due to that lack of discipline often helps fix that discipline to get the person to do whatever it is that they're supposed to do, if that makes sense. Right, so I feel like it's really important that we gotta challenge our kids, and that's what we're trying to do here. Peaceful Warriors is teach people how to take on challenges and not feel bad when they're not good at it the first time, right? And not worry about what anyone else thinks, because no matter how good someone in here is at something you're trying to do, they've probably been doing it for much, much longer. And we try to keep that mindset and that reminder of how things are supposed to go, to try to coax kids into being willing to take these social interaction challenges, to take these physical challenges, so that they can build themselves up to the next levels. And once someone gets a taste of that, then they tend to run with it, right? And they tend to be great with it. But the longer you put off challenging your children, the longer you put off challenging a kid, the longer you put off allowing them to have a taste of that personal victory, the harder it's going to be for them to ever take the steps to achieve that personal victory, because they're going to end up having a lot of anxiety around the social interactions and around the thing that they're going to try. They are not going to be willing to take the challenge because they'll start being the type of person that only does things that they can be good at, which means they'll only be doing simple things their entire life and never build to do great things. We all would love to see our kids have happy lives and build up to do great things and things along those lines, but the only way you're going to be able to create that in your children is to make sure that they're challenged, that they learn responsibility, that they learn how to take care of their responsibility, and that they learn what consequences are for not taking care of those responsibilities. And they have to learn how to cope with social consequence, with the consequences of not following responsibilities and things along those lines, right? If a person's never felt social pressure, or if the power of social pressure is too much for them because they never learned how to cope with it, then that person is going to have a very, very difficult time making it through life, right? And these things often cause a lot of behavior issues and acting out, because they have never had to learn how to deal with it. They've never had to learn how to deal with the consequences, the social consequences, and the responsibilities. So what this all comes down to for me is, without challenge, there can be no discipline. Without challenging our kids, they cannot learn how to be disciplined in their lives. Without challenging our kids, they cannot learn how to take responsibility for what they're doing. Without challenging our kids and letting them take the challenge on their own, right? Letting them succeed or fail on their own over and over again, then they're not going to learn the skills it's going to take to get them to wherever they might decide they want to go in life later. So it's not on me, for example, we'll talk about my son again. If he takes on a challenge, it's not on me to make sure he completes that challenge successfully, right? It's not on me to keep him from failing. That's on him. He can fail or succeed on his own. What is on me as a parent is to make sure that he doesn't give up, and that because he made that choice, he follows through with the responsibility of following through with that choice. And it's through those challenges that a child can build perseverance. It's through those challenges that a child can build discipline. parenting is not about giving a child everything that they ever wanted, right? It's really, really not, because then you end up, like I say, that child's been able to just do whatever they wanted their whole lives, if has only ever done the bare minimum of responsibility. Those are the ones that are going to come up, and you're going to wonder why you have behavior problems at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. You're going to wonder why they have no discipline, going to wonder why they won't try anything new, going to wonder why they don't interact socially, going to wonder why they if they are put in a social interaction or challenge, that they'll suddenly revert to acting like a toddler. It's because that's all they've ever learned to do. They've never had to learn how to take on a challenge and lose and keep their chin up, right? It's one of the most important skills you can teach a child, how to lose, take on a challenge, lose, and keep the chin up, right? But the only way you can teach that is make them take the challenges, let them choose their challenges. They choose their own challenges. I mean, you got sports, you got activities, you got different things you can learn. You have, there's so many different things, right? From skateboarding to martial arts or whatever, right? Let them pick their challenges, let them take their challenges, but make them take their challenges, and success or fail, make them go with it. And my whole thing is like, I know people have to quit stuff sometimes, but my whole thing I talk to Axel about is never quit on a bad day. Never quit on a bad day. Don't quit because you're having trouble getting this particular skill. So I won't let him, right? He takes on challenge, he wants to try something. He goes in, he starts taking the challenges, runs into a skill he's not very good at. Even if he wants to quit, I'd never let him. I've never let him since he was 3. I say, okay, you can quit, but not today. You can quit as soon as you learn that skill you want to quit because of, right? So he'll have some skill that gets the better of him, and he'll want to quit, and I'll say, no, you don't get to quit until you learn that skill. Now, once he's learned that skill that made him want to quit because he was having trouble with it, then I'll ask him again, okay, now that you've learned that skill, now do you still want to quit? Now, if you still want to quit, now that it's a good day, you learn that skill, then cool. But 90% of the time, the answer is no. 90% of the time, the answer is no, I don't want to quit. I only wanted to quit that day because I was feeling bad about the fact that I wasn't able to do what I was doing. Now, after doing that with Axel, from the time he was 3 to now when he's 9, this kid already knows that. He never quits or gives up on anything unless he just needs extra time to set it aside and take on a different challenge. He never quits anything just because he has a struggle with it. Matter of fact, the more he struggles with it, the more he works on it. And I attribute his, and this is why he's been allowed to take the black belt test at a younger age than anyone ever in the past with us, is because of that. And I attribute a lot of that to making sure he was constantly challenged, making sure he was forced to take those challenges. He could choose his own challenges, but he was forced to take those challenges, and making sure that he was not allowed to quit until he overcame the first challenge or the first step of the challenge, right, and was doing well at it. I feel like those 3 things have really allowed him to find this piece of his character and identify himself as somebody who doesn't give up, and identify himself as somebody who can overcome challenges. And when a child can identify themselves in that way, the sky becomes the limit. The sky becomes the limit. But you first got to challenge them. Now, if we're going to talk about challenge, though, we also have to talk about focus, the importance of focus. So I feel like it's going to be more and more important to challenge our children with those things with the rise of social media and online gaming, which I'm not saying that shouldn't be done. Those are things that kids will need to know how to do and do responsibly, right? But these physical challenges and real world challenges are important to be able to interact in the real world. And that's where I feel like things like martial arts, what we're doing, or any of these other little sports, those are going to be very, very important for the future for our physical and mental development of our children. But the other thing we got to talk about is focus, because like I said, these online gaming, social media, stuff like that does make it harder to pay attention to real life. So this is where it becomes important that we work with our kids on learning how to use their focus in different ways and learning how to pay attention in different ways. We always talk about with the basics, watch with the eyes, listen with the ears, think with the brain, and do the right thing. But then we got to put that into practice and show kids how to put that into practice of, okay, I know you're doing this and you're supposed to be doing this, but you're talking about this over here, so you're being very, very distracted. So now let's put your eyes on what you're supposed to be doing. Let's put your ears on what you're supposed to be doing. Let's put your brain on what you're supposed to be doing. So let's stop thinking about this over here and let's start thinking about this here, right? And learning how to control our focus. Now, the key to controlling focus is not what people think it is, because you can't just force it. You can't just force yourself to pay attention to something because you want to. You can't just force yourself to pay attention to something because it needs done, and you cannot force your kids to do it either. So the key to getting someone to focus is how they're breathing. And I know that sounds like one doesn't have anything to do with the other, but it does. The slower one exhales, the less racing thoughts they have. So the slower you can get someone to exhale, the less racing thoughts they'll have. Once they have less racing thoughts, you can raise a question pertaining to the thing they need to do. So I do this to myself. I do this to myself when I need to focus on something. My mind's racing. I'm on 10,000 different things. So I'll slow my exhale for 4 or 5 breaths. I'll slow my exhale. Not my inhale, just my exhale. Once the thoughts slow down a little bit, then I'll ask myself a question that has to do with what I need to be doing, what I need to be focused on, and I'll force myself to find an answer to that question. It'll be a question I don't know the answer to, and I'll force myself to find an answer to that question. Once I force myself to find an answer to that question, now my thoughts have turned to the thing I need to focus on, and that's how I control my focus. And that's a great way you can teach kids to control their focus too, is through how they're breathing. If the exhale is shallow, if we're having a shallow exhale, and well, it doesn't really matter so much with the inhale. It's more about the exhale. If you have a shallow exhale, the thoughts tend to run away with you. You start to build anxiety. You start to feel overwhelmed and things along those lines. The slower the exhale, the easier it is to slow the brain down and find a space in between the racing thoughts to try to ask a question about the topic you need to be focused on. And once you can get there and begin to try to answer your own question, then you'll find that your focus shifts, right? You've now taught your brain to shift focus. But your brain has a hard time shifting focus if your exhale is shallow, because a shallow exhale in your breath is one of the first predicators to fight, flight, run, whatever they are. You know the thing, right? A shallow breath is one of the first physical predicators that begins to create that within us, and it starts to create that feeling of being overwhelmed and that feeling of having too much going on at once. So by slowing down our exhale, we are releasing the body's tension. We're releasing the body's hold on the fight or flight feelings, right? And by releasing that hold, we begin to be able to have a slight bit more control of what we focus on. So my last episode, Stuck in a Rut, we talked about the RAS, the reticular activation system. That's the part of the brain that filters what information it makes it to your consciousness, right? And that part of the brain is trained by trauma and reward. So if my exhale is shallow, my body feels a slight amount of anxiety and trauma, then that part of my brain is only going to allow me to think about things that are causing that anxiety and trauma. So by slowing down my exhale and releasing that tension in my body, I can begin to release just the beginnings of the anxiety. And if I can release the beginnings of the anxiety, it can open up the RAS, the reticular activation system, to be open to new and different information, because it's no longer holding that fight or flight. You know what I mean? So learning how to focus is going to be extremely important, especially learning how to focus on the real world and learning how to differentiate between the online world and the real world, and online interaction and real person interaction, because online interaction is very easy compared to talking to somebody face to face when you don't have time to sit there and think about what you want to say. You know what I mean? You got to answer, you got to respond, this, that, and the other. So that social interaction is very, very important to a child's development. It's very important to their ability to think clearly, think quickly, and use their wit. And it's very, very important for, I get it, online gaming, video games, stuff like that can help with decision-making skills, critical thinking, and critical decision-making skills. But unless you relate those skills to the real world, it's not going to do you any good. But you can be really good at critical thinking and decision-making in a video game, but then when you end up in a physical altercation, or you're trying to do something physically in your life, and you don't know how to translate that critical thinking and decision-making ability to the real world, because you're socially anxious, because you don't know how to deal and cope with social interaction, then you're going to lose that critical thinking skill, and you're going to have a very difficult time in the social interaction. You're going to break down to the last thing you remember that works. And if the last thing you used to use to get you to be able to handle social interactions was when you were 4 and 5 years old and you would just cry and ignore people, then even when you're 15, you're going to revert back to that, right? Unless you've learned new coping mechanisms since. But the only way you're going to learn new coping mechanisms is through social interaction and through accepting challenges, right? Through learning how to deal with challenges, through learning how to cope with things like that. So I'm going to get to the comments real quick. Ms. Rose says, I don't want to with no good reason, and followed by meltdowns has become all too common. They'll never survive adult life like that. Yeah, you know what's sad? Most of our 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds that come in don't have that. The vast majority of our 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, even 9-year-olds that come in, they do a great job. They're willing to open themselves up. They try things. They're willing to take on that challenge, because when we're younger, we understand the concept of needing to take on a challenge. So these kids, the younger kids, they come in here, we got no problem with them. They take on the challenge. They get super excited. They do their best about learning. They get to the end of the class, and even if they're not great at something, they're like, oh, look what I can do now that I couldn't do before, and it's wonderful. Usually where we run into this is the 12, 13, 14, 15 range, where they'll try something a couple of times, and then the first time they're corrected, or the first time they're challenged to do it a little higher or a little differently, they suddenly go, I don't want to, and then they go cower in a corner, right? And I don't know how to deal with that, to be honest with you, but it happens from time to time. We'll have teenagers that do that everything will be going great, but then the first time they're challenged, the first time they're shown that their punch isn't as good as it could be, the first time they're shown that they could do something better, they cross the arms, they get defiant, they refuse to talk, and they go sit in the corner. I had this happen just a few nights ago, where I was trying to introduce myself to someone who wanted to start class who was of that similar age range, and I gave my name, right? I was like, hey, I'm Mr. Rose, I teach this class, so you're going to try a class with me today, you want to give this a shot? And all they did was this. I say, hey man, are you shy? Can I get your name? I promise it's going to be an easy class. Just going to be me, you, and like 2 other people. It's going to be a great time. I'll make sure it's fun for you. It's not going to be too hard. I absolutely promise. And he just goes, I'm too tired and don't want to do it, right? So then the first time that we tried to get him on the floor, he went and hid in the corner. Guys, this was a teenager. He went and hid in the corner, right? So this is the kind of things we have to be careful about, I think, with future generations. And the biggest part is we have to remember that we've got to challenge them, we've got to teach responsibility, and we've got to force them to deal with the consequences of that responsibility and not just shut down. We've got to help them develop coping mechanisms so that they're not being an adult and melting down anytime something goes even the slightest bit wrong. You think depression and anxiety numbers are high now? Wait till there's a whole generation of people who at 14 and 15 are defiant and have meltdowns the first time they're challenged. Wait till they're 20, 25, 30, right? Then we'll really see some weird stuff out in public, and I really hope that doesn't happen to very much extent. But the only way we can prevent that is to get in front of it, right? We got to get in front of it, and from an early age, show kids how to deal with social interactions, show them how to cope with other people, show them how to cope with challenges, show them how to overcome challenges, right? And all that stuff is really, really important, because the teenagers that I've seen act like that, I have no idea how they're going to be as adults, but it scares me. It frankly just scares me, right? And I've seen a couple of them grow into young adults at this point. And honestly, as young adults, all they do is run away from the world. They refuse to work, refuse to get a job. They try to find other people to live off of. They don't do anything but sink themselves in video games. And then at the same time, claim that they're grown and claim that they can make their own decisions and claim that they can do their own thing with their life and they're in charge of their life. And that may be true to some extent, but if you're not paying your own bills and you're not working your own job and you're not finding your purpose in your life and you're not challenging yourself, then I hesitate to say that you could call yourself grown. You know what I mean? Like, if every time you run into a challenge you just shut down and throw a childish temper tantrum about it, right? Another comment, parenting is about teaching them the skills they need to make decisions and take actions on their own. That's right. I would want my son to be able to do better with his life than I have. And I know how challenging it's been to do something good with my life. I know how hard that's been. I know what that's taken. It's taken an extreme amount of discipline and perseverance. It's taken an extreme amount of compassion and integrity. And so if I want my son to be able to do better in life than I did, then I can't just give him everything. I have to show him what it's like to earn things. I have to show him personal victory. I have to show him what it's like to have to go without things. I have to show him what it's like to set goals and then try to achieve them. I have to show him what it's like to set goals and not be able to achieve them. I have to be able to show him all these things so that he can build the coping skills and all the skills necessary to find happiness in his life. You're not going to find happiness in your life if you find yourself scared of anything new, right? Life is about experience. Life is about going out there and trying new things. If you think that only good things are supposed to happen to you in life, you're sadly mistaken, right? Just good things are not supposed to happen to anybody, right? Your life is not supposed to just be good. And really, is there a good and bad? It really just depends on how you look at that situation. You know what I mean? And learning how to deal with that and experience life is one of the important things that tells us who we are, what our character is, and gives us a purpose to move through. So let me tell a little parable real quick, right? Talking about the difference between good and bad. How do you know a situation is good and bad, right? Well, there's an old story about a farmer and his son, right, who had one horse left on the farm. They only had one horse left. And that horse ran away one day, and all the neighbors said, "Oh, what bad luck." And the man says, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" 3 days later, that horse runs back from the mountains with 3 or 4 other horses in tow behind him. And all the neighbors say, "Oh, what good luck. Your horse came back and brought all those horses." The farmer says, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows," right? A few days later, his son is bucked from one of those horses trying to tame them and breaks his leg. The town says, "Oh, what bad luck. Your son broke his leg." The farmer says, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" 3 days after that, the military comes through conscripting people to serve, right, to fight in this war, but the son couldn't join because his leg was broke. Good luck, bad luck, who knows, right? And so that's the thing. Nothing's inherently good or bad. It all depends on what we do with it and how we look at it. But the only way we can learn that is through taking on challenges. We can't learn that by having everything handed to us. We can't learn that by getting everything we ever wanted. We can't learn that by every time I ask for something, I get it. You know what I mean? So like Axel, every time he asks for something, and I promote him to ask for stuff, but every time he asks for something, every once in a while I'll get it. Other times it's you got to earn it. You got to earn it with your own money through your business. You got to earn it by doing this for me. You've got to earn it by this way. And he's learned that through that you have to earn things. You can't just have things handed to you. You've got to earn them. And I feel like that's a very important skill that maybe some kids are starting to lack if they spend more than 50% of their time in social media and online gaming interactions. Then they lose the ability to learn how to earn these things and instead expect it to be given to them, right? And that's not going to be good. So this is why I feel like the things that we do are so important for the future generation, so important for future kids. I still got more comments. Let me get a drink real quick, though. All right. They do. Whenever I hear someone say, "I don't want to," we talk about what their reason is. Yeah, why do you not want to? If they don't have one, I make a deal with them, as in challenge them to keep going. That's it. And most of the time, I have people say, "I don't want to." I say, "All right, man, well, I can respect that. What's the reason you don't want to?" Most of them don't have one, or at least are ashamed to say it, because the reason is probably, well, it's just too hard, and they don't want to say that because they're ashamed of that or embarrassed of that. If you don't have a reason to challenge them to keep going. And yeah, that's exactly what we usually try to do here. Is we have someone shut down like that and become ultra defiant. I try to say, all right, look, if you don't have a reason for not wanting to, if you don't have a reason for acting like this, then I tell you what, if you come out here and try this with me just a few more times, then I will do something for you. I will give you something. I will do something in exchange, right? So you can earn something from me. Now, does that always work? No, it works with young kids. It does not really work with teenagers as much because that behavior has been set, right? That behavior has become to be set in the psyche because they have went too long being allowed to act like that, being in situations where they felt like they could get away with acting like that. So that's something we have to watch out for as parents. That tape conversation from last night, trying to get him to buy his own roll of tape so he doesn't use up mine by playing with masking tape. Yes. So Miss Rose was having a conversation with Axel last night. He was playing with some masking tape. And at first she told him not to, and he started to feel bad. But then she was like, "Look, you want to use tape? Fine. But you have to buy me a roll, right? So if you want to do it, you have to learn that this costs money, and you'll have to use your own money to learn that lesson." That's absolutely important. It's that kind of challenge. It's that kind of teaching someone cost and reward, cost and earning things that I feel like is so important, and has been, something that we have to watch out for the next up and coming generations with. And the only way that we're going to be able to help them is we have to remember not to give them the world. I know we want to when they're first born. I know we do, and I had the same feelings, right? I want to give them the world. I still have that feeling where I want to give my son the world. But really, in the end, the only way he's going to be able to cope with me giving him the world is if he understands what it's like to not have anything and have to build up, right? And have to build from the ground. It's through that development through challenges and through learning how to focus and learning how to deal with social consequences and things like that, and learning how to cope with it. It's through learning how to cope with it that they really learn about who they are. And once they understand their own character and who they are, then they can begin to look for purpose in their action. They can begin to look for things that give them meaning, and then they can begin to accept those challenges and go on. And then as a parent, you won't have to worry about them just quitting and giving up when it gets hard. You won't have to worry about them, acting like a child the first time their boss gets onto them at a job, or the first time that something gets hard, but it starts young. You have to start kind of young with those challenges, learning cost versus reward. Yes, need to recognize the worth of having skin in the game. That's exactly right, Mr. Atkins. I don't know how long you've been listening to this, but that was a lot of what we were talking about, the importance of challenges and what that lack of challenge and responsibility from a young age can begin to do. I know, Mr. Atkins, you've seen as well a couple of times, and it's not usually an issue so much with younger kids, it's more teenagers a lot of times, where they'll come in and, the first time something gets hard, or the first time they start to need to be corrected, they become defiant and start to run away and hide like a small child, instead of learning how to cope and deal with that situation as an adult would, right? As a strong person who is strong in themselves and who they are would. And why it's to prevent that, it becomes so important to make sure that they understand social consequence, that they understand holding up their end of a bargain, that they understand like we were saying, cost versus reward, and that they understand what it is to earn something, and they understand what it is to have to be responsible for something, or that the bad consequence that can happen from not being responsible for it, right? One of the examples I'd given was like giving a child the responsibility of washing their own clothes, and then if they don't keep up with that responsibility, their clothes get smelly. Then they have to deal with their parents and everyone around them giving a hard time and making fun of them because their clothes are smelly. That's social consequence. And then eventually that gets to shame them to the point that they will not want to go out in those clothes anymore, and hopefully they will learn to solve that problem by beginning to wash their clothes responsibly, right? That's just one example. The same thing could be said of like having a trash can in one's own room and learning how to empty the trash, not empty the trash, and what the social consequences are of that. And this is why it's so important, right? Focus and challenge and social interaction. And like I said, with the rise of online gaming and social media, it's never been more important for kids to learn how to take on those challenges, how to take on physical challenges in particular, because they're already taking on mental challenges, but how to join that to a real world, how to learn to pay attention to the real world and join that to real world social interactions. So yeah, it's going to be important for them to know how to act on social media and leverage that as a tool. Same thing with online gaming and stuff like that. But it is also important for a person's development to develop their body physically, and for them to develop the connection between their brain and the body. And video games and social media interactions are not enough. That's not going to do that. You've got to have real world social interactions, and you've got to take on real world challenges and real physical challenges. I know most of my generation will remember sports, right? Most of us played some kind of sport, especially men, but women too. I know were usually forced to play a sport whether they wanted to or not, because their parents wanted them to learn, right, what it's like to win and what it's like to lose, what it's like to work hard and what it's like to struggle at something. And that was physically, and to grow in strength physically, because it takes time and it takes effort. And these are skills that we need to, as now that we're parents, we need to also remember to be giving to our children. We need to remember that, like I said, I'll say it like the fourth time for this video, it's not about giving them everything they want, right? Yes, you want to give them a better start, you want to give them a better future, you want to give them better than what you had, but before you go giving them all the stuff they want, give them the skills first. Give them the skills to earn it on their own, and then you won't have to worry about it. Give them the skills to do better in life than you did at an earlier age than you got the skills, and you will no longer have to worry about it. In fact, they will be able to go on and do much bigger things than you did. And that really is my goal as a parent, just like it's the same as my goal as a teacher, to make sure that every student is better than me at a much earlier stage, right? And I think the same thing with my son. I'll make sure he's a better man than me, make sure he's got a stronger character than me before he's even considered an adult. You know what I mean? And that's important to me. So I'm going to go ahead and get off here. I just wanted to ask you guys' opinions on the importance of challenges for kids and children's development. I feel like it's very important. This has all been my opinion. So if you come on here, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And when you see all of our posts, make sure you give us a comment, even if it's just an emoji or something, whenever you see our posts, so that our stuff can go a little bit farther. Because there's gatekeepers, right? The people that interact with our page the most, all of our posts get shown to them first. If they don't react with it, it doesn't go any farther. So if you're seeing our posts, it means you're one of our gatekeepers. So please react and comment on those posts so that they will end up being shown to more of our audience, and I would greatly appreciate it. So until we see you guys again, and don't forget to share our podcast, Teammate Talks. Find it by searching Teammate Talks anywhere you get your podcast. Until we see you guys again, be the best teammate you can be, and be the best at being you.